Welcome to Breakaway. Today we're sitting down with one of the greatest Philadelphia Eagles of all time, David Akers. We're going to go off on the crazy, unscientific COVID protocols that were released during the NFL offseason that have been used to segregate the vaxxed and unvaxxed, why America is worth supporting and loving, how the NFL has changed for the worse since his playing days, and then we'll break down the moment David tied the record for the longest field goal in league history, and much more. I'm John Root, and this is Breakaway. Welcome to Breakaway. Today's guest is a six-time Pro Bowler. I'll give you some more stuff here. This guy's a legend who scored the most points in a single decade in the history of the NFL and holds the record for most field goals in a season. Oh, and he's a part of the Philadelphia Eagles Hall of Fame. David Akers is in the house. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We got to talk about how we're handling the NFL protocols for COVID. COVID's been all over the news consistently, and you as a former player playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, also playing for the San Francisco 49ers, you went through a lot in your career, but I couldn't imagine what these players have to go through right now.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Obviously, last year it was crazy in itself. Just watching, they had different markers that they would wear on the wristbands to see where everybody was as they were tracked via GPS through the building and who they were around, and as far as the contact tracing and all that. Obviously, this year has taken a change as well. You know, obviously, they're talking about more of the vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And to be honest with you, I had this discussion with my wife just the other night. Like, I'm really happy that I don't have to make these decisions right now, because obviously the news is pointing one way to the other at times with these players, and they're in kind of a tough situation. And I actually see a little bit of both sides on this. As a business side, you want to make sure you're protecting your players and the game. The shield is what they always talk about. You want to protect the shield, and you want to be able to have fans in the stands, and you want to be able to have those games because the monetary loss is significant, obviously, right? But they also lean on their doctors, and their doctors are saying that, hey, this is going to be the best way to do it. So there's that. But then as Americans, as players that you feel like you're in top physical shape and all that, they're also saying, well, shouldn't I have the ability to make those own decisions for myself? So I see both sides, and it's a tough kind of path to go down right now.
But they're trying to make sense of all this too, because there was a memo that came out in the offseason, and then Brian has a great breakdown of how some of these players have responded. But I feel like this is a way they're just trying to segregate the vaxxed and the unvaxxed, and they're basically just trying to shame the unvaxxed players. So you have some of the healthiest people on the face of the earth. And this is what they're telling them here in this memo. You're going to get tested every single day if you're unvaxxed. You're also going to have a 15-player limit in the weight room. You cannot eat with your teammates, and you have a designated meal room, and you got to be physically distanced. Also, you can't do any social media, marketing, or sponsorship activities. And then you can't use the steam or the sauna. That's a huge part of recovery and making sure you're staying healthy. But how do you make sense of all this?
I wish I could get with some prominent doctors and these physicians and sit down and ask, certain questions at times, because I really wish that we could get to a point where, how do we not politicize our health situation in life? And if we can look at, argument A and argument B and be able to see and make decisions for ourselves, I think is the best scenario.
That's what Cole Beasley was saying too. It's like, I'm not anti or pro-vax, I'm pro-choice.
Right.
So you have players that are speaking up and saying like, hey, this is about choice. This isn't about right or left, center, whatever. It should be about choice.
But currently, the way it's set up as an employer, they can basically say, hey, we want you to play, but if you're not going to abide by our rules, we're going to change this. And one thing that I think probably should have been addressed a little bit more in this offseason, looking kind of towards the future as a what if things aren't back to completely normal? How do we deal with this as a players association and have the collective agreement of the players going into it?
Because it's ultimately up to them too. It's like you have these players that can speak out individually, but you have the players association where it's like, you fight for us. So do you feel like they're feeling like they're not doing enough? Or
I believe that some of those players definitely feel like there's not a fight for them out there. And again, a lot of these players are relatively young. I was able to play until I was relatively older, but most of these guys are 23.
That's the beauty of being a kicker.
Exactly.
Though, right?
If you can stay in, you're doing well. But some of these guys are relatively young, 23, 24 years of age, and relatively healthy. And at least to the current situation, haven't been the kind of the group of people that have really been effective in a negative way. So I think we're all stuck in this twilight zone right now, and I do feel for all of the owners. I feel for the players, and ultimately, as Americans, we're trying to get back to life, and you can get back to those games. It was nice to see the Hall of Fame game the other day.
Yep.
To answer your question, though, ultimately, I think it's a tough decision right now, and ultimately we'll see what the NFL does going forward.
And I know you've been vocal on your own social media about that too, but can you tell us a little bit about some of the players that are in the league right now that are actually standing up?
I'm real proud about a lot of these guys because they really are a vocal minority. They're going out and it's real David versus Goliath. These are, maybe 10% of the players in the league aren't vaccinated right now. And so they're going up against a real big voice against them. Now, DeAndre Hopkins and Cole Beasley, they were the two that kind of dominated the headlines over the summer, but they weren't the only ones who were speaking out against it. Kirk Cousins has come out and said it's a personal decision, should be a personal choice. That cost him some sponsorships.
There's a hospital, right, that decided we're not dealing with Kirk Cousins anymore.
Yeah, it was actually a hometown hospital from his hometown that they said, hey, you used to be our spokesperson, but with this, COVID takes that you have, we don't align with you anymore. This is done. This is over. Cam Newton and Mac Jones, they came out and said, hey, this is a personal decision. Chase Young from the Washington football team says, I'm not going to, shame or push any of my teammates into going out and taking the vaccine. My favorite was personally, Josh Allen came out and said, hey, I'm all for, I'm not anti-vax or pro-vax or necessarily, but if you start mandating it, that goes against our constitutional freedoms. And that really is the take that I think a lot of these players should have, is that, hey, it's not necessarily about being pro or anti-vax. It's about being pro-freedom and pro-making your own personal decisions.
All right, coming up next on Breakaway, we're going to hear a lot more from David Akers, the life of an NFL kicker, and much, much more. I'm John Root, and this is Breakaway. Welcome back to Breakaway. Right now, we are going one-on-one with NFL legend David Akers. You ready to do this thing?
Sure.
All right, let's start out with this. So the hypocrisy in sports media is just running rampant. You were in the NFL for about 16 seasons, a long time. You dealt with the media. I'm sure you had some good times, some weird times.
Sure.
But how do you feel like stories are being told now, and what's your kind of view now that you're outside of football? I
feel like now because of social media and because of Twitter being out there to the point of it's almost instantly updated. It's what can I get clicks on? And even if it's not true, if I throw it against the wall and it gets me clicks, I might be able to find some way to make it true. And that just becomes the dishonesty part that I don't really care for. But it's everywhere. And I think that starving for content is really what's kind of driven this to be to a point of absurdity. And the fans are now the reporters as much as the journalists are. So it has definitely shifted. There are some really quality journalists out there, and I think just the overkill of it out there is really the thing that's killing it, because it's saturated the market.
Yeah, it feels like there's an agenda consistently. It's not just hey, we're preparing for this game, here's what happened in this game, and here's the aftermath. You had a really powerful statement when we were talking earlier, saying how America should look like a locker room, where it doesn't really matter, where you come from, where you lean politically, whatever. It's just, hey, we have one goal. We're here to win games. We're here to win a division, win a conference, win a Super Bowl, and be the best of the best. So why do you think America should look like a locker room?
Well, first off, as a Caucasian American, I was one of the minorities basically in the locker room. It's generally about 75% African American to the Caucasian there. And I never really saw the color issue in the locker room. I saw guys from different socioeconomic backgrounds, cultures, religions, and ultimately we all got along really well.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about people that we have celebrated life. We've celebrated marriages. We've cried over deaths and family members have passed, and miscarriages, and we've lived life. We were together with each other more than we were with our own families for a majority of our life there. With that, we still had the purpose to go out together collectively as a team to have an agenda of winning the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And I think that's what America should be. Having goals to make America as best as possible. And with that, we all kind of improve together. It might sound cheesy, it might sound like a cliche, but ultimately there's some incredible men I've been able to share that locker room with, and all colors of the rainbow of who they were personally and skin tone. So great people, and that's what America should be.
You gave your all during the NFL draft too. That was that was in 2018. The draft was in Dallas. So basically, Philly just won the Super Bowl. The NFL draft is in Dallas, and you go out there, and of course, Dallas fans are booing like crazy, and you were just ready to just absolutely roast everybody. It's like, how about those Philadelphia Eagles? But you ended up announcing the draft pick for the Eagles. You said, "Hey Dallas, last time you were in the Super Bowl, these draft picks weren't born." Like, it was an absolute roasting sesh, and it was great. And then you announced the Eagles draft pick, whose first name was Dallas.
Right,
it was Dallas Goedert. So can you tell us about how that came about?
Sure.
Like, is that your idea? Or did somebody from the Eagles reach out to you? How did that work?
So they do a Legends pick every year, and a team will pick a player, say, okay, if we have a pick this round, you'll do the pick.
Yeah.
And that year happened to be the second round, but the Eagles did not have a second round pick at the time. Mm-hmm. Well, in my mind, I kind of thought, okay, if they get it, maybe I should say something, to let them know who won. And I started,
just in case they forgot.
So then, as I was kind of thinking through this, I had heard through some friends that they were talking about it back in Philly, that I was going to be the guy that was going to say it. And obviously, I have a ton of respect for the Dallas players and what they've been able to do over the years. But what would the fans say if they were in that opportunity? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where my mindset went. And I started thinking something around this range of like, hey, the last time they won, you were watching replays on VHS. That was kind of literally my mindset. But again, they didn't have a pick. So the Eagles end up trading with their first round pick with the Ravens. And then they drop back and get the second round. And actually the Ravens pick Lamar Jackson with that pick. So I knew I was going to be up the next day. Mm-hmm. At least I thought I did. So I started kind of thinking, well, what should I talk about? And literally that night, they talked about a 19-year-old that was drafted. I went, wait a minute. I wonder, what are the ages? When was the last time they won? So I just kind of looked it up really quickly. And that's how it all went, because I heard one of the picks was 19 years of age. And so.
Did you have to run this by like Eagles PR at all? Or they just kind of like, David, do your thing?
Yeah, no, they did that. As a matter of fact, we got pulled up on the stage quite a bit sooner. And Roger Goodell was kind of right there in the opening, and he's like, "Are you going to say anything?" Because the year before, Drew Pearson, who just got into the Hall of Fame, congratulations to him, well-deserved, he had kind of roasted the Eagles fans the year before. And so we had kind of this fun back and forth deal on TV prior to that. So I was like, okay, this would be something fun to say. I was like, should I or shouldn't I? And Goodell goes, take all the time you need. I was like, all right, in my mind, I'll go out there. If they're really loud and they're giving it to me, then I'll say something. But if they're cool, then I'll just say, hey, this is the pick, world champs, Eagles, something like that.
I feel like you turned on like WWE.
Yeah, so
that's what you turned into.
So loud, I couldn't hear myself speak. So then I'm screaming just to hear myself, and I'm letting them have it because I can't hear. Yep. So ultimately, I just kind of went through all the different areas that the Eagles had dominated that year, and then ultimately being the world champs.
That was an incredible moment, but we're going to go over some more incredible moments in just a second. But hey, well done. If you weren't liked in Philly before, they loved you right after that. Next on Breakaway, we'll dive into David Akers' most memorable moments of his career. You don't want to miss it. I'm John Root, and this is Breakaway. Welcome back to Breakaway. We are here with David Akers. We got to break down some of his most memorable moments of his career. There's been a lot of ups and downs, probably kicks to the left and the right, but some people might not know you went undrafted out of Louisville. You were talking about that earlier. Lamar Jackson went there. You spent some time in NFL Europe. Nice little European vacation, I'm sure. But you were one of the most successful kickers in the 2000s. One of the most memorable moments, obviously, I know for me, and NFL fans in general, was a 63-yard field goal in Lambeau Field. You got to tell us, what was going through your mind? Did you know how historic this was going to be?
Well, first off, I was with the Niners at that point, and it was my second year with them. and I had just come off surgery. And ultimately, for me, it was like the first game that I was going to be back really to try to see what I could do. And opening game, first half, hit a couple field goals, I believe, at that point. Time's running down. Okay, what are we going to do here? Are we going to be able to get in range? And my leg wasn't ultimately the same strength that it was when I was, 22. I was almost 38 years of age at that time. And I see Jim Harbaugh, like, you good? And I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And so.
Is that pretty intense with Jim Harbaugh? I could kind of imagine we're just like, all right, David, like, we're throwing you out there.
So I knew the whole Harbaugh families for years. I almost played for Jack Harbaugh at Western Kentucky, and then John Harbaugh was my position coach for 8 years prior to him going to the Ravens. So the game comes up, and I'm thinking to myself, for any of you all that are golfers out there, don't overswing, right? All of a sudden, I was going to think my hips are going to clear through, and I was going to pull it, and I didn't want to do that. So just smooth it and let it ride out. Now, at the time, Tom Dempsey was the only other guy that had hit 63, and his was down in New Orleans. So I hit the ball, and I was like, you idiot, you underswung. You didn't hit it hard enough. And so I kind of
drove. You really thought you didn't have enough power.
Oh yeah, I was just like, you didn't attack the ball. You didn't hit it like you needed to. And so it's just was tracking as straight as can be. I'm like, this is going to come up 2 yards short. I just knew it. I was like, I cannot believe I had my first opportunity and I screw it up like this. And I just kept kind of riding, and then it hits the crossbar.
It just plunks right off it.
Right. And of course, none of the times when I hit the upright, it goes in. It makes that loud clang and comes flying back. But it bounces straight up in the air, and just enough to come over the backside of it. And Randall Cobb at the time had actually tried to go up and block it, which you can't do anyway. It's kind of like goaltending, but it was that close. So for me, I was very fortunate because I didn't hit the ball very well. We were like, oh, it's your greatest hit. It's like, no, I really didn't hit the ball well at all, but got lucky, traveled. Ultimately, it was probably the last exciting moment of my career because I got injured a couple of weeks later again, had to have surgery again that off season, and started kind of the beginning of the end. It was kind of interesting. I went to 3 straight Pro Bowls, had 3 surgeries in a 16-month period, and from my last Pro Bowl to my last game was 22 months.
Jeez.
So the pinnacle to the outhouse in a quick second there.
Well, that seriously was one of the greatest moments ever. I think you could feel good. It's like, do you feel like you could hit a 64-yarder in Mile High?
Oh, absolutely. You can hit 6-7 yards further out there easily. So like hitting a 52, 53 is significantly easier as far as distance and having to hit it harder. And most of the guys, you don't have to really hit it much harder from that distance, but once you start to cool it down or you get a little wind in your face and you're trying to put a little extra into it, you don't have to. It just can smooth it and it's just going to carry.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it carried because that was definitely one of the greatest moments, not only in your
career,
but NFL history. Last question for you, real quick. Kicker right now. Do you think there's someone in the league that could break 64 yards?
Oh, absolutely. There's several. But my favorite, just to watch day in and day out, is Justin Tucker. He's been consistent year in and year out so far.
Speaking of fantasy football, he's been incredible for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Justin Tucker.
I mean, his game winners coming up, he's just a guy you can rely on. His mental toughness is there. Undoubtedly, he's got one of the strongest legs out there to be able to do it in adverse conditions all the time. But there's so many great kickers out there right now. You look at the Butkers, the Will Lutzes. I just saw he had posted something. I guess he's going to have some surgery. He put that out there for New Orleans. But, and it's funny, you start to see kind of the lineage of guys that played and look at who some of their coaches were. Randy Brown is the kicking coach and special teams coordinator now, but he was a kicking coach initially for the Ravens. But it's a John Harbaugh special teams group that, kind of bring these guys to go out there, the Graham Ganos of the world, and back then the Stephen Hauschkas, and, see those great guys kind of come out, then you're kind of known as the guru. And so I do love watching the game as the next generation comes up because they're always bigger, better, faster, stronger.
And you've had an incredible career, but definitely so glad we could break down that moment. But coming up next, This might be one of the toughest moments of your career. We're going to have some rapid fire questions for you.
Sounds good.
I hope you're ready. Don't go anywhere, because coming up next on Breakaway, we got some rapid fire questions for David in the 40-second shot clock. I'm John Root, and this is Breakaway. All right, welcome back. This guy's on the hot seat, David Akers, 40-second shot clock. Rapid fire questions. 40 seconds starts now. Who is the greatest kicker of all time?
Right now, Justin Tucker.
Will the Bucks repeat as Super Bowl champs?
No.
If you could have gone pro in any other sport, what would it be?
NASCAR.
Who was your favorite athlete growing up?
Ooh, John Riggins.
Worst stadium to kick in?
Oh, Giant Stadium.
Favorite coach you've ever had?
John Harbaugh.
Longest field goal you could kick right now?
Oh gosh, probably about 55. The leg would go 56.
Last question at the buzzer. How many kickers do you think are in the Hall of Fame?
There's 2.
4.
No, true kickers, 2.
True kickers too. Am I wrong on this one?
Jan Stenerud and Morton Anderson. You got Lou Groves. If they all play different, George Blanda, they play different positions.
Boom.
Boom.
Look at that. I got roasted just
Schooled
like
by
Dallas
David
got
Akers.
roasted. But that was the 40-second shot clock. Well done.
Awesome.
Good stuff. Well, that's all we got for you. David Akers, thanks so much for stopping by the studio. Producer Brian, always a pleasure. But you got to make sure you join us next week to meet another sports legend for an authentic, unwoke sports conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this episode so we can keep the conversation going all week long. I'm John Root, and this is Breakaway.